I was alone with my stepmom for a week. Everything changed. It was just the two of us, my stepmom and I. No distractions, no interruptions, just one long, unexpected week together. I never thought I'd get to know her like this. Let me introduce myself. My name is Adam, 18M, and I just graduated high school. My dad remarried 3 years ago to Natalie, 30F. She's the kind of woman who could walk into any room and make everyone stare. Not because she's trying, she just has that effortless confidence. The kind that makes you want to listen when she speaks. I never really saw her as mom, though. I mean, she was barely 12 years older than me. She married my dad when I was 15, and at first, I kept my distance. She was the young, gorgeous new wife, and I was just the moody teenager. My dad was the one we insisted we bond, but Natalie never pushed. If anything, she seemed just as unsure about the whole step-family dynamic as I was. Things were fine. She was polite, friendly, but we never really talked until last week. My dad had an emergency overseas trip, and my stepmom and I were left alone in the house for 7 days. At first, I thought it would be awkward. I planned to stay in my room, play video games, and avoid any unnecessary interaction. But the universe had other plans. The storm that changed everything. 2 days into my dad's trip, a massive storm hit our area. I'm talking power out for hours, Wi-Fi down, and a fridge full of food that needed to be eaten before it went bad. That's how it started. Natalie and I were sitting at the kitchen counter, candles flickering, eating straight out of takeout containers and laughing about how unprepared we were for an actual emergency. It was different. We actually talked about life, about stupid childhood stories, and about how she met my dad. It was the first time I saw her as a person instead of just my dad's wife. Then, at some point, she looked up at me and said, "You know, I always wanted to be the cool stepmom, but I think I just ended up being the awkward one instead." I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged and told her the truth. "You're not awkward. I just never really gave you a chance." She smiled, and that was the moment everything changed. The unspoken conversations. The rest of the week felt different, lighter. We hung out more, cooked together, even binge-watched some ridiculous reality show she was obsessed with. I started realizing that she wasn't just my dad's wife. She was funny, sarcastic, and way smarter than I ever gave her credit for. One night, we were sitting on the couch, watching TV, when she said something I never expected. "You know, Adam, I don't think your dad and I are going to last." I turned to her, unsure if I heard correctly. "What?" I mean, don't get me wrong, I love him, but sometimes I feel like, I don't know, like I'm just playing a role I never really wanted. I didn't know what to say. What could I say after all? She was opening up to me in a way I never imagined. "Does he know how you feel?" I finally asked. She just sighed. "I don't think he really sees me anymore." The morning that everything changed. The next morning, my dad called. He was coming home early. Natalie and I didn't talk much that day. It wasn't awkward, it was just different. Like we both knew we'd crossed some invisible line, but neither of us wanted to admit it. When my dad walked through the front door, everything snapped back into place. Natalie greeted him like nothing had changed, and I kept my mouth shut. But something had changed, because now, every time I look at her, I wonder if she's thinking the same thing I am. Would she be happier if she had never married my dad? And honestly, I think I already know the answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. My dad was back, snoring in his bedroom like nothing had ever happened, but I knew things just weren't the same. I kept replaying everything in my head. Natalie's words, the way she looked at me when she said them, like I'm just playing a role I never wanted. Was she unhappy, stuck, regretting her choices? And worse, why did I care so much? The shift in the air. Over the next few weeks, I tried to ignore it, to pretend that nothing had changed, but it had. Natalie wasn't the same around my dad. I noticed the way she smiled less, the way she'd space out at dinner, barely touching her food. And when she thought no one was looking, she looked exhausted. But the biggest shift? She started avoiding me. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then it became obvious. The way she'd leave the room whenever I entered. The way our casual conversations disappeared overnight. The woman who had once laughed with me over candlelight dinner now barely acknowledged me in the mornings. I wanted to talk to her, to ask her what was wrong, but how do you even start that conversation? "Hey, remember when you told me you don't think you and my dad are going to last? Yeah, let's talk about that." Not happening. The breaking point. Then one night, everything exploded. My dad had been drinking. He wasn't drunk, but he was annoyed. Something about a deal at work going bad. We were all in the living room when he suddenly turned to Natalie and said something I'll never forget. God, Natalie, do you ever do anything but complain? She froze. The entire room went silent. And for the first time, I saw it. The moment she stopped trying. She didn't argue, didn't roll her eyes or snap back like she usually would. She just stood up and walked away. That night, I heard something I wasn't supposed to. I'd gotten up to grab some water when I heard voices from my dad's office. It was quiet, like they were trying to keep it down, but I could still make out the words. Maybe we should just stop pretending. That was Natalie's voice. Oh, come on, you're being dramatic. That was my dad. Am I? Because I feel like I've been faking this for a long time, and I think you have too. My dad didn't say anything for a long time, and then finally, we'll talk about it later. Natalie laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. Right, later. Then the door opened, and I barely had time to duck behind the counter before she walked past me, her eyes red, her face set like stone. She didn't see me, but the first time in my life, I saw her completely. She wasn't just my dad's wife. She wasn't just my stepmom. She was a person, a trapped person. The decision that changed everything. The next morning, Natalie was gone. Not for good, just gone. No explanation, no note. My dad didn't even seem that surprised. He just muttered something about her needing space and left for work. But I knew better. And when she finally came back that night, I knew exactly where she had been. Because when she walked through that door, she looked at me first. And in that moment, without saying a word, we both knew everything was about to change. The night everything shifted. That look she gave me, it was like she was trying to decide whether to say something or keep everything bottled up like she always did. But I didn't say anything either. What was I supposed to do? Ask my stepmom if she was okay? Tell her I heard everything? So I did what I always did when things got weird. I went to my room. The late night knock. I was lying in bed, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, when there was a soft knock at my door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Natalie stood there, arms crossed over her chest, looking like she was still debating whether or not this was a good idea. Can I come in? I hesitated for half a second, then stepped aside. An honest conversation for the first time. She sat down on the edge of my bed, exhaling deeply, like she was trying to collect her thoughts. I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. Did you hear? She finally asked. I nodded. No point in lying. Yeah. She ran a hand through her hair, staring at the floor. I don't know why I'm here, she admitted. I feel like I needed someone to talk to, and you're the only one who... She cut herself off. I raised an eyebrow. The only one who what? She shook her head. Nothing, forget it. The confession. For the next few minutes, we just sat there in the silence. It was weird, but not in a bad way. More like we were two people who had been forced to live in the same house for years, but had never actually talked before. He doesn't love me, she finally said. The words were quiet, but they hit like a hammer. I didn't know what to say, but I just let her talk. I think I've known you for a while, maybe even before we got married, but I thought if I just kept trying, it would work out. She let out a bitter laugh. Guess I was wrong. I swallowed. Well, what are you going to do? I asked. She shook her head. I have no idea. The plan that wasn't really a plan. We ended up talking for a long time, longer than I expected, and for the first time, she wasn't just my stepmom, she was a person who had made mistakes, a person who was stuck in a life she didn't know how to escape from. I don't want to be here anymore, she finally admitted, but I have nowhere to go. That hit me harder than I expected. I had always thought of Natalie as confident, put together, the kind of woman who didn't take crap from anybody. Seeing her like this, unsure, vulnerable, was weird. Then go, I said. She blinked. What? Leave. If you're this unhappy, just leave. Start over. She let out a dry laugh. It's not that easy. Why not? She stared at me for a long time before shaking her head. You're just too young to get it, Adam. Maybe, but I wasn't too young to see someone wasting their entire life in a place they didn't belong. The turning point. Natalie stayed in my room for a while, but eventually she left. And I thought that was it. I figured she'd keep pretending, keep playing the role of the perfect wife. But I was wrong. Because the next morning, she was gone. For real this time. No note, no text, just gone. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. I actually missed her. The aftermath. My dad barely reacted. She'll be back, he muttered when I asked her. She just needs time to cool off. But days passed, then weeks, and she didn't come back. He still wouldn't admit it, but I knew she was never coming back. And the weirdest part, I felt relieved. One night, almost 2 months later, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hey, it's me. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. Natalie? Yeah. I stared at the screen, not sure what to say. Where are you? Not far. She hesitated, then sent another text. Want to grab a coffee? I didn't even have to think about it. I met her at a small cafe just outside town. She looked different, happier, lighter. She smiled when she saw me. I wasn't sure if you'd actually come. Yeah, well, I wasn't sure if you actually wanted me to. She laughed, shaking her head. You're different now. So are you. We sat there for hours talking about everything, her new life, her plans, the fact that she had no idea what she was doing, but was happier than she had been in years. I should probably go soon, she finally said. Don't want your dad finding out after all. I snorted. Trust me, he doesn't care. She studied me for a long moment. You know, you don't belong there either. I frowned. What do you mean? She sighed. You ever think about getting out? I swallowed, because the truth was, I had. A lot. But I never thought it was possible. Not until now. And when I left that cafe, something had shifted inside of me. For the first time, I realized I wasn't stuck. I had options. I had a choice. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to take it. The final goodbye. A week later, I packed my bags. I didn't tell my dad, didn't leave a note. I just left. And when I pulled into the parking lot of that same cafe, Natalie was already there, waiting. She grinned when she saw me. Took you long enough, I smiled back. Yeah, but I'm here now. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. I may not have known where I was going. Natalie hadn't told me, and I hadn't asked. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, I wasn't trapped in a house that never felt like home. I wasn't sitting at the dinner table pretending my father gave a crap about me. I was just free. She tossed her bag into the trunk of her car and slid into the driver's seat. You sure about this? She asked, glancing at me. I nodded. Yeah. She studied me for a second longer before starting the engine. Good. And just like that, we were gone. The road trip I never expected. At first, I thought we were just going to the next town over. Maybe she had a friend's place we would crash at for a while. But the highway stretched in front of us, and Natalie just kept driving. Where are we going? I finally asked. She grinned, rolling the window down. Does it matter? It should have. I should have been scared. But I wasn't. I leaned back, feeling the wind against my face. Not really. The first night, we stopped at some tiny roadside motel just off the highway. It wasn't much. One of those places where the neon sign flickered and the ice machine looked like it hadn't worked in years. But it was quiet. And right now, that was all that mattered. We'll figure out the rest in the morning, Natalie said, tossing me a key. Yeah, I agreed. Tomorrow. The realization. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell I got here. Less than a week ago, I was stuck in my own father's house, suffocating under the weight of a life I didn't want. Now, I was on the road with my stepmom, heading towards something. And for the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt found. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Natalie knocking on my door. Breakfast? She asked when I opened it. Sure. We sat in a booth at some greasy diner, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and eating pancakes that were somehow both soggy and dry at the same time. And I realized something. I didn't want to go back. Ever. I looked at Natalie. "What's the plan?" I asked. She smirked. "Well, what do you want it to be, silly?" And just like that, I had my answer. We didn't look back. We didn't check in. We just kept driving. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide my future. I was deciding it for myself. And man, it felt good. Miles blurred beneath us, town after town fading into the rearview mirror. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It wasn't forced. It just was. After nearly a week on the road, we finally stopped in a quiet coastal town, the kind of place where people didn't ask questions, where no one cared who you were or where you came from. It was exactly what we needed. Natalie pulled into the driveway of a small rental house she had arranged in advance. "This is it," she said, shutting off the engine. "Looks nice," I replied, stepping out. It wasn't big, it wasn't flashy, but it was ours. For the first time in years, I wasn't just existing, I was actually living. We settled in quickly. Natalie picked up shifts at a local cafe while I found work at a dockyard. Hard work, long hours, but it felt good to do something real. Something that didn't involve pretending to be someone I wasn't. We weren't stepmother and stepson anymore. We were just two people making a life for themselves. And for the first time, that was enough. I was fixing a leak under the kitchen sink when Natalie walked in, holding her phone like it might explode in her hand. "It's him," she whispered. I didn't need to ask who. I wiped my hands on a towel, my chest tightening. "What does he want this time?" She hesitated, then held up the screen. "I think he found us." I took the phone from her and stared at the screen. His number, his name. After everything, he still thought he had a say in our lives. I clicked decline and shut the phone off. "Let's go get dinner," I said, grabbing my jacket. Natalie nodded. No more looking back. No more waiting for permission. This was our life now, and we weren't running anymore. As we walked down to the beach, the sun setting behind us, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel lost. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And that felt like freedom.